The announcement by the United Arab Emirates that it's quitting oil producer group OPEC came as a surprise in the midst of the war in Iran and the subsequent blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. As one of the largest oil producers in the group, the UAE's exit in the next few days is already being seen as a major blow for OPEC. So what does this mean for global oil production and prices? Dr. Adi Imsirovic is a lecturer in energy systems at the University of Oxford and joins me now. Good to have you back on the program with us. Now, in quitting OPEC, the UAE government said that its plans were to increase production and not to be constrained by OPEC quotas. So why does the UAE at this juncture want to increase production?
Well, at the moment, really, the announcement doesn't really make any difference to the oil market because we have this problem in Hormuz. The UAE has been fortunate enough, together with Saudi Arabia, to have a bypass pipeline. So they've been actually able to export some oil, about 1.7 million barrels anyway. I think the decision is a little bit surprising in terms of timing, but not so much in terms of oil production. I'll stick to the oil production side because the other side of the coin is a political one. The production side is not surprising. For quite some time now, we were wondering whether they were going to leave OPEC. What happened for the last few years, UAE actually invested about $150 billion into the oil industry so they can produce more. So before the war, UAE was producing roughly about 3.4, let's call it 3.5 million barrels a day. But they could produce as much as 5. So obviously they were making a huge effort not to overproduce, mainly under pressure from Saudi Arabia. And between Saudi Arabia and UAE, there's a bit of a difference in philosophy where the oil market is going. I think UAE can see a glimpse of the end of the sort of oil era, and they want to produce as much as possible, invest money into other industries, whereas Saudi Arabia would still like to do it very, very slowly and gently, keep the prices as high as possible for as long as possible.
Yeah, so the UAE departs OPEC on Friday. How do you think OPEC and, of course, its leading producer, Saudi Arabia, how do you expect them to respond?
It's a big blow. It's definitely a big blow for OPEC, partly because UAE to Saudi Arabia is a bit of a trusty lieutenant. They were always there. They were there to cut production when they could produce more. They're the only country outside Saudi Arabia that actually had large excess capacity. And that large excess capacity was used by OPEC to threaten everyone else and bring them into line. Because like in 2020, when people overproduced, they could just say, look, don't do it. They overproduced, they just increase production, prices collapse, and everyone's losing money. And that's how it all happened in 2020. So it's a big blow. I think OPEC will try and put a brave face on it. But I think OPEC is still going to stick around for a period of time because simply for the next foreseeable future, because of the war in Iran, we are going to need every single barrel we can get out of the region. So it won't really matter whether somebody's overproducing or not. But longer term, it's a massive blow. It could be a beginning of the end of OPEC.
Yes, so let's look at that longer term, assuming that, once the war is over, the Strait of Hormuz reopens. If the UAE then decides to, significantly increase its production to perhaps 5 million barrels a day, would that have an impact on prices? And perhaps, does it have the capacity to spark a price war with the Saudis and other members or existing members of OPEC?
I would think for at least a year it wouldn't matter because, as I said, I think what needs to happen is we need a lot of oil to basically fill up the oil that we've eaten up from the strategic reserves, from commercial reserves. So far in this war, we have consumed probably as much as 800 million barrels of oil from these reserves. So basically, this is the savings account money, if you want. Now they have to be rebuilt. So after the war, after the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, we'll need to rebuild these reserves. So the impact is not going to be immediate. But the observers in the oil market are going to look at this not just from the UAE point of view, they're also going to look at it from other members of OPEC. Is this the only country that's going to leave? What's going to happen with the others? Are the others going to stick when they realize the UAE don't want to stick? So longer term picture is very uncertain, is very bearish, and is very good for the consumer.
Yes, and you mentioned talking about the political angle to this. Can you elaborate on that in the context of the UAE quitting OPEC?
Well, I'll do with my limited political knowledge. I'm an economic commentator, but essentially this war UAE has taken the brunt of this war. More missiles and drones than anyone else. I think the feeling was that nobody really helped as much as they could have. And as we know that, going to Abraham Accords of 2020, UAE has been rather close to Israel and the United States. I think UAE probably saw Israel as a backdoor into the United States support. And they realized, I think, that political side, and let's not forget that the Saudis, with the key country within OPEC, and UAE have been at odds in Somalia. They've been on the opposite side of the Yemeni conflict. So, and they have very different views regarding energy transition as well. So I think they just concluded this is the right time when they thought they had enough in terms of political misalignment, if you wish, and they made this decision now.
And do you believe perhaps Saudi Arabia would have to perhaps do something to reform OPEC, perhaps bring in the OPEC plus partners closer to the decision-making processes, and perhaps even look at inviting back, past members like Indonesia, Qatar, Ecuador?
Well, Saudi Arabia would love to. But to be frank, I think Saudi Arabia has already done as much as they can. A lot of observers talk about OPEC plus as a very serious observer for the last almost 40 years. I don't think OPEC plus really matters at all. The only thing in plus is Russia, and Russia's done virtually nothing really to help, particularly because of the war with Ukraine. So that plus hasn't really helped that much. If anything, right now could get even more complicated with American involvement in Venezuela, because the next country that may leave could be Venezuela under American pressure. And Venezuela is one of the core founding members of OPEC. I mean, they were instrumental in setting up OPEC. So it's all very, very difficult for the Saudis at this stage. But at the end of the day, Saudis have the lowest cost of production of any country in the region. And if they decide to actually flood the market with that production, they will bring the market down, and a lot of people, so even countries, will go down with them. The first casualty might be actually the United States shale production, because that's very often, you haven't asked me, I'm sorry, but this is a really interesting question. I've been asked a lot about, is this a win for Trump? Well, on the surface of it, it looks like it is. But a few years down the road, it might be the end of shale oil like it was during 2020.
Yeah, but really great to get those insights there, Dr. Adi Imsirovic. Thank you very much for your time.
Most welcome.